Mr. Cipollone said something to the effect of, please make sure we don't go up to the Capitol, Cassidy. Keep in touch with me. We're going to get charged with every crime imaginable if we make that movement happen.
And Cipollone would know. He was the White House counsel at the time. That's Cassidy Hutchinson testifying before the January 6th committee. As we said, she's talking about Pat Cipollone, White House counsel. He knows everything. He'll testify tomorrow, not on TV, but in a deposition with the committee. Cipollone quite simply knows, as we said, everything from the Trump White House. He was there starting in 2018, largely seen by Republicans as one of the good guys who tried to keep the Trump train on the tracks. In other words, do not get charged with every crime imaginable. Democrats hope he's the January 6th equivalent of John Dean. Dean served as White House counsel under President Nixon, flipped on the president during the Watergate hearings. After that, it was all over for Nixon. Tom Dupree is here, former Deputy Assistant Attorney General under George W. Bush. Optics first. What do you make of the fact that this is a closed-door deposition, which means the committee can then go on CNN and leak whatever they want?
Well, it's for sure. The committee is going to have total control over what gets leaked and what gets pushed into the public sphere and what doesn't. It also avoids a situation, which I'm sure the committee wanted to avoid, where they were asking Cipollone questions in public and they didn't know how he might answer or what he might say. The one thing this committee has done, which they are very good at, is running scripted hearings. And if you put on a witness and you're not 100% sure of how he's going to answer your questions, you're rolling the dice. So I think the committee is very, very thoughtful in taking this approach and getting his testimony behind closed doors.
The flip side of that is, why wouldn't Cipollone say, I've seen what's happened where you're playing one sound bite that then people are disputing whether it's in context. I've seen you put on a witness who then had her testimony impeached by others, members of the Secret Service, on and on and on. I'll testify, but it's only in public in the way every congressional hearing up until this point's been done.
For sure. That would have been an approach he could have taken. I think this way it probably will get a little less public attention versus if he had testified, live one evening in prime time. And also, if the committee does leak a misleading version of what he said, there's nothing that would prevent him from going on, the front steps of the Capitol and setting the record straight and saying, well, here's what I also told the committee that you didn't hear about.
Fair enough. It's a nod in deference to the committee by saying I'll agree to your terms rather than mine. This is an important point because we believe in attorney-client privilege in America. It's an important thing. He's not President Trump's personal attorney. He was the White House counsel, which is different. But this is what President Trump just said. Why would a future president of the United States want to have candid and important conversations with his White House counsel if he thought there was even a small chance that this person, essentially acting as a lawyer for the country, may someday be brought before a partisan and openly hostile committee in Congress, or even a fair and reasonable committee, to reveal the inner secrets of foreign policy or other matters so bad for the USA? Obviously, John Dean, Republican, Pat Cipollone, Republican. What keeps the next Republican Congress from calling the current White House counsel to talk about discussions with Joe Biden about Hunter Biden?
Yeah, and look, the president's comments really get to the heart of this whole concept of executive privilege, which is to say that a president should be entitled to get confidential advice from his close advisors that remains confidential and doesn't get put on the front page of the New York Times. I think in this case, I would imagine that there were some negotiations going on behind the scene where the committee and Cipollone reached a deal, maybe with the input from the former president, about what Cipollone could testify about and what he can't testify about. For example, he could address topics A, B, and C, but not topics D, E, and F, precisely to preserve the importance of that executive privilege and ensure that future presidents can continue to get candid and secret advice.
One of the reasons we have you on is because you're one of the best lawyers in Washington. Hypothetically, if you were advising Cipollone, what would be A, B, and C, and what would be D, E, and F?
I think A, B, and C would be things that he may have observed, particularly as it sounds like on January 6th, he may not have spent a lot of time in the company of the president, but just observed what other people were saying, what other people were doing, comments he made to other people. The things that would be off limits would be the pure legal advice that he was giving to the president. That, to me at least, would obviously implicate much more closely these questions about attorney-client privilege, about executive privilege, and the like.
If Pat Cipollone says what, it qualifies as full John Dean, real problems for the president.
Boy, I would imagine it would have to come something close to an explicit acknowledgement by the president that what was going on or what the president was contemplating or was doing was illegal and violated the law. I mean, right now we've got a pretty good detail of, comments and proposals that were made to the president. We know some things of what the president said, but what it seems the committee has really been looking for throughout this whole hearing process is evidence that the president himself understood and knew that he was violating the law. That would be, in my mind, really the closest we could get to a John Dean moment from Cipollone's testimony.
And wouldn't that directly violate what you said? If you were Cipollone, you would never agree to testify to?
Well, it depends. I mean, if it's something that the president just said, particularly if the president said it in the context of a big group outside the context of lawyer-client discussions, well, then maybe it wouldn't be his privilege. But again, if it's something that the president said to Cipollone in the context of Cipollone giving him legal advice, that would fall much more squarely within what's protected by the privilege.
If you were representing President Trump right now, would you be, in the words of the other networks, more nervous than ever about what Cipollone would say? Is he the biggest fish so far?
He might be. We've heard from a lot of eyewitnesses, but the eyewitnesses we've heard from, at least the ones recently, like Ms. Hutchinson, they were people who were maybe one step removed, a little more on the periphery. They were overhearing things, reporting things that they heard Cipollone say, that they heard the president say, that they heard the chief of staff say. Cipollone is obviously a central player. He was a high-ranking official, the president's legal counsel, the White House legal counsel. And look, he was literally in the room where a lot of this happened. And so I think he is a pretty critical eyewitness, and it'll be very interesting to hear what he has to say tomorrow.
Yeah, well, we'll hear what the committee wants us to know, that they interpret what he heard, because obviously we won't hear from him, and just in time for the Sunday shows for them to come on and talk about it. Hey, Tom, it was good to see you as always. Thank you. Thanks for never sending us a bill.
Thank you, Leland. It's my pleasure.
Good to see you. Thanks for watching. Go to newsnationnow.com to find NewsNation on your television provider. And don't forget to subscribe. Click the red button to get more of NewsNation's fact-driven, unbiased coverage.